Our next session is just to begin. When AI makes mistakes, who is responsible? This is a session delivered by our dear Mufti Wahaaj Mohammed, who serves as an imam in Michigan, as well as holds a degree from the Georgia Tech University in business. And Dr. Mohammed Ansari, as he recently just spoke, he holds a PhD in computer sciences from the University of Wisconsin at Madison, and currently works as a senior applied scientist at in his company. And both of these scholars, both of these speakers will be presenting on when AI makes mistakes, who is responsible. So I would like to pass it on to our dear Mufti Wahaaj Mohammed and Dr. Mohammed Ansari.
الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله تعالى عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا. Today, inshallah, as you see the title of our talk, when AI makes mistakes, who is responsible? As we move to a more AI-powered or AI-fueled world, perhaps we could say that, there's bound to be mistakes. There's bound to be harm caused. There's bound to be unintended consequences. Something that's very important in Islamic law is jinayat. When wrong is done to somebody, who bears responsibility? Who bears laman? Who is sinful? Who is not sinful, but they still may be liable and responsible for damages? This is a very extensive part of Islamic law, and what we aim to do today is speak about this. And we have a few objectives as well. Number one, we want to appreciate the nuance and depth of fiqh and its application to AI. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent us in this world. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. We've been created for one purpose, to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And our worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is manifested through each and every one of our actions. Our ubudiyyah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be in every action. There's not things that they just don't matter. Just, I could do whatever I want. No. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent us for a purpose. So the fuqaha have shown us that everything that we do, we can frame it and we could put it in categories. Is it permissible? Is it halal? Is it haram? Who's responsible? The second objective is to realize that we're all mukallaf, we're all responsible to Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. We'll have to answer for our deeds. We can't just say, well, everybody's doing it, I'm going to go with the flow. What is my responsibility? That's also something to understand. The third objective I could add, it's not written here, but it's to show practically how collaboration can be done. Because obviously, in every field, there's experts. And a scholar, a mufti, has knowledge about Islamic law, how Islamic law works, but many of the questions are dealing with concepts that they have to learn about. So who do you go to? You go to experts to learn about this. So the goal today, inshallah, one of the other goals is to show how collaboration can take place, and that's why it's a joint presentation. The roadmap for today, number one, we'll start out with some ayat of Quran, wahi to ponder upon. The reason we want to do this, what are the main sources of Islamic law? We have the Quran, we have the Sunnah, we have Ijma', we have Qiyas, right? But we'll start out with Quran, and then we're going to mention a lot of things that the fuqaha say. And I want to highlight this, is that nowadays there's a very big push to try to separate Quran, Sunnah, and fiqh as if they're different things. No, don't tell me about what Imam Abu Hanifa said, Imam Malik said, Imam Shafi said. I want to know what the Quran and Sunnah say. The fiqh is just the outcome. It's the usable, it's what the fuqaha have done and given us the Quran and Sunnah in a manner that we can apply very easily. But we'll start out with some ayat of Quran to ponder upon. Then we have AI in our world. We'll speak about taklif. We'll speak about assigning blame in Islamic law, framing AI, and some questions. So inshallah, we'll start out with some ayat of Quran and some ahadith of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, some things for us to think about. The first ayah is in Surah Maryam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, إِن كُلُّ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ إِلَّا آتِ الرَّحْمَنِ عَبْدًا لَقَدْ أَحْصَاهُمْ وَعَدَّهُمْ عَدًّا وَكُلُّهُمْ آتِيهِ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ فَرْدًا. There's none in the heavens or the earth who will not return to the most compassionate in full submission. Indeed, Allah fully knows them and has counted them precisely. And each of them will return to Him on the day of judgment all alone. We'll all have to answer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all of our actions. The second.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ووضع الكتاب فترى المجرمين مشفقين مما فيه ويقولون يا ويلتنا ما لهذا الكتاب لا يغادر صغيرة ولا كبيرة إلا أحصاها ووجدوا ما عملوا حاضرا ولا يظلم ربك أحدا. Allah says, and the record of deeds will be laid open, and you will see the wicked in fear of what is written in it. They will cry, woe to us! What kind of record is this that does not leave any sin, small or large, unlisted? They will find whatever they did present before them, and your Lord will never wrong anyone.
Also, Hadith in Bukhari Sharif, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said that there's none amongst you but his Rabb will talk to him, and there'll be no interpreter between him. He'll look to his right and see nothing but his deeds, which he has sent forward. And he'll look to his left and see nothing but his deeds, which he has sent forward. And will look in front of him and see nothing but the fire facing him. So save yourself from the fire even with half a date. Again, all of this is to highlight that everything that we do, no matter what technology, no matter what thing is in front of us, we'll have to answer to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Now we come to AI in our world. We want to just go through some scenarios. What things does AI do in our world? Number one. This is showing up. It's a bit slow. No problem. Okay, wake up in the morning using an AI-based alarm clock. I had a talk at Fajr time today. I'm staying at my in-laws in Des Plaines. It's like 30 minutes away. So at 5 o'clock, how am I going to make it here? So I have this alarm clock on my watch, and what it does is it based on your sleep cycle, what it does is it wakes you at an approximate time, right? That's an AI-based system.
Your day might proceed. You might have a self-driving car. It may be supervised, it may be semi-autonomous, it may be fully autonomous.
After that, you get in your self-driving car, you go to an appointment that you are approved for based on an AI application that deemed you eligible. What I mean is like it might screen you, whether it's insurance or qualification for this exam, and it'll pass you.
You might then continue to your work or your school or whatever it is that you do, and you may use tasks, or you may assign tasks to ChatGPT or some LLM to improve your productivity throughout your day.
Now, a person, they might be working somewhere, and a weapon system, it uses AI to determine which targets to hit.
During a break at work or in the evening, you might be scrolling on your phone, you might be doom scrolling, and you see that there's these pervasive AI systems that kind of control what you see, the feed, the algorithm, right? So you may see some things that you like, you may see some things that they kind of not want people to see, and so there's an AI system that's controlling what we take in on social media as well.
So all of these things, a lot of times they work seamlessly. You wake up on time, you get to work, you get to your appointment, you do your assignments. A lot of times these things work seamlessly, but these things can also go wrong. So now your alarm, you set it, it's going to wake you up based on your sleep cycle. What happens? You end up missing Fajr. Right? That's possible.
You might be in your self-driving car and you might get into some sort of accident.
Your application, you show up to this appointment and you find out that you were rejected.
You may, in the course of using ChatGPT to improve your productivity, you may decide to help you cheat on a paper or something, going against the terms of service of your use of the application.
Innocent civilians are killed by a drone strike that uses AI technology for facial recognition.
You might see valid content, for example, such as that supporting Palestine, you might see that flagged as hate speech, and people may not have, or it may not have the reach that you intended.
So all of these are examples where AI, you're using AI-based systems, and something happened, something went wrong, right? Now, who's responsible for these things? Can we blame everything on the system, or does a person have individual accountability? That brings us to our next thing, which is called taklif. Does anybody know what taklif here means? What does taklif mean? I see some people say, not the Urdu taklif. Which taklif? What does taklif mean? Moral responsibility. Responsibility to our Creator. So as AI becomes more ubiquitous and increasingly affects our day-to-day life, what is a Muslim's responsibility? Just like a few years ago, like many of us in high school, there's no smartphone. But all of a sudden, 2007, 2008, the smartphone came out. Now it's ubiquitous. Everywhere you go, you're going to see a smartphone. Half of the functions today have like interaction with the speakers is on the smartphone, right? It becomes ubiquitous. So are we going to, what is our responsibility here as this becomes more and more part of our life? Do we go with the flow? Do we resist? Yeah, go on.
So there's two extremes in which we can take this, right? We can say that everything that comes with the development of the field is good and we adopt it wholeheartedly and we run with it. Or the other extreme is to say that all of it is bad and we will structure our lives in a way that we never have to interact with AI systems. And so as Muslims, we follow the middle path. We don't let ourselves bend to one extreme or the other, but we use the guidelines and principles that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger have given us, and we use that to make the most of this, which again is something that Allah has subjected for our use. So we use those to make the most of what we can, and we develop principles and guidelines to sideline its harms.
Okay, so coming back, all of us, we have to answer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every mentally sound adult is answerable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for each of their actions. This ayah again from Surah Al-Kahf, وَوُضِعَ الْكِتَابِ, and the records of deeds will be laid open and you'll see everything in the book. People will say that there's nothing that this book has left out. So now even our use of AI, we're going to have to answer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it. Being mukallaf is not simply based on the actions that we do, right? We don't look just at the outcome. We look at the intentions behind it. And we also look at perhaps my action wasn't anything, but I led to another action. Allah says, وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. Assist one another in goodness and righteousness, and don't assist in sin and transgression. And be mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As you're going to see, that when it comes to these AI systems, many times a person is not doing anything themselves, but they are a link in this chain that's leading to an action that many a time has an unfortunate outcome, an unintended outcome. Islam is based on moderation and balance. We can't use AI in an unrestricted manner, basing all of our decisions blindly on it and then diverting blame elsewhere. For example, I'll give a practical example. There was a case study in which hospital systems, in order to approve patients for the eligibility of certain treatments and treatment plans, they were using AI-based systems, right? And for whatever reason, the AI, the data set was skewed in such a way that it was more likely to reject applicants or patients of color for certain treatments, right? Now, the hospital system, what they were doing was they were pushing the caseworkers to base their conclusions about approval or rejection solely based on what the AI model, what the tool told them to do, right? So in that case, what happened is they would go out of their way, even if a valid counter-argument was brought to them, they would go out of their way, the caseworkers, to try to justify whatever the AI said, without even thinking into it themselves. Meaning it was a foregone conclusion that whatever this tool has given us, this is what the correct answer is, right? So we can't just follow it in an unrestricted manner, but that doesn't mean that we're going to be, Luddites. I don't know if anybody's heard that term before. Anybody knows what that is? Luddites? No one? Yeah. Yeah, they were like weavers who opposed the loom, right? They opposed some technology. So as history showed in the past, Muslims can't remain on the side. As you've seen in this conference, mashallah, we have many Muslims who are, in very influential industry in AI, and we must be active in shaping the policy, right? In shaping the narrative, in shaping the ground rules. Shifting. I'm sorry. This one is not on me, right? We can shift the responsibility to the computer. Or we can shift it to whoever's laptop it is. It's not my laptop. Okay, so while we're figuring this out, I'm going to keep talking, inshallah. Let's go back to our first, few examples. I can see this. Yeah. Okay, no problem. Okay. So let's go back to our early examples. I wanted to have them on one screen, but inshallah you can remember with me. Waking up and using an AI-based alarm clock, getting in a self-driving car, the appointment, using ChatGPT, weapon system, and this subversive content on social media. Let's explore these things a little bit. The interesting thing about all of these, they seem like very different, disparate type of things that may happen in a day-to-day basis, right? But there is a common thread that is tying all of these things together. What is that common thread? Each of these things can be addressed from a single comprehensive Shari'i framework. And what is that? That is the concept of assigning blame. Blame, jinayat, daman, who is going to be responsible? So when it comes to assigning blame, the principles to approach and place responsibility for any emerging scenario were put in place by the fuqaha centuries ago.
So, Mufti Wahaaj, how do you think that fiqh books written 800 years ago can relate to something as modern as artificial intelligence? How does that work?
It's working. Okay. So that's a good question. When preparing for this project, this presentation, I was sitting in my house, I was reading a book, right? I was looking in a book, it was in Arabic, and my son, he came up to me, and you know how kids are, they hear a little bit of things here, they hear a little bit there, and they make khichdi out of it, right? So my son, he knows that I teach Quduri for Darus Salam, their continuation class. So he asked me, and he knows there's something about AI that I keep talking to Dr. Ansari about. So then he told me, he's like, Baba, are you still working on your Quduri AI project? I was like, yeah, something like that. So then he's seen I had a book in front of me. It was in Arabic, but he's like, why are you reading an Urdu book then? So I was like, like our fuqaha, they gave us the answers for any type of emerging scenario. They framed it for us. How? They've put principles in place that we could extrapolate, that we could base our assessment of anything new, we could base it on these principles that they put in place. So then he asked me, he's like, oh, so it's like if a tiger attacks somebody, will you look at something like that? I was like, yeah, something like that. Okay, so anyway, this responsibility, laman, assigning blame, it's going to be in two categories. Our responsibility is going to be responsibility to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A person commits an action that's prohibited by the Sharia and therefore they're sinful. And sometimes there's legal liability for damages. You could think of this like a Venn diagram. There's not always overlap between the two. It's possible for a person to be liable but not sinful. You didn't do anything sinful, but you're responsible for some damage caused by an unintentional act. Okay? For example, you slip and fall on top of somebody. It wasn't your fault, right? But if they get injured, you're going to be liable for it. Okay? You may be sinful but not liable for anything, right? Legally liable. So in America, many things are allowed by law that are haram in Islam. right? A person may be sinful, a person may have to answer to Allah, but nothing's going to happen to them legally. Lastly, a person can be both liable for some damage and a person can be sinful as well. Now, in order to look at assigning blame, there's three broad principles that we can go through. And what I want you all to do, inshallah, is try to remember these three principles. Why? Because at the end, we're going to come back to our few case studies, our alarm clock, our being rejected, our car crash, and we're going to try to apply those principles to our, scenarios. Okay, principle number one. Sorry. Okay, the immediate causer of harm, in Arabic is called a mubashir. They're going to be liable, even if their action is not prohibited. Prohibited, the reason I use the word prohibited is, it may be sinful, it may not be sinful. The concept is called ta'addi. A person has gone beyond some bounds, okay? For example, you could argue the point, if a person is speeding, right? Are they going to be sinful? Are they not going to be sinful? You could argue that point. But what you can say is they're doing something that's prohibited, right? By the laws, over here, a person is prohibited from speeding. They've done some ta'addi. So the immediate causer of harm is liable even if their action is not prohibited. But this applies only when the immediate causer of harm is a rational actor and the sole cause of harm. So, I'll give an example. Let's say that there's somebody who is starving, like they're about to die, right? They're starving. So they find some food that belongs to somebody else. They go ahead and eat it. Is that person sinful for eating the food? I'm asking, what do you think? No, they're not sinful, right? In fact, they should eat over there. They need to save their life. But they are liable to pay the person whose food that they ate, right? So they're liable there, even though they're not sinful, okay? Number two, if there's any other causes of the harm, indirect causes of the harm, their action will also be analyzed before assigning liability. So we could say that the default is that the direct cause of harm, maybe you could say guilty until proven innocent, maybe. But the default is that the blame is going to be on them. But that's when they're the sole causer of harm. If there's other factors, we're going to look at everything. Principle number two. The indirect original cause, this is called mutasabbib in Arabic, is liable for damages if their action is prohibited. Okay? The role of the immediate actor will still have to be analyzed. Okay? Number three, we'll put them together now. When there's an immediate causer, a mubashir, and an indirect original cause, liability will apply to the immediate cause. Okay? That means you have both over here. However, it's not unrestricted. If there's no rational reason to attribute the resulting act to the direct cause, you're going to go back to the original cause. You're going to go back to the mutasabbib. So in effect, there's only an original, albeit indirect cause. So I'll give an example. There's a word, who knows what a mulji is? Mulji. Amar, do you remember? Mulji is, okay, somebody is being forced to do some prohibited act by like threat of huge harm, even killing a person, right? So for example, somebody tells you, if you don't kill X, Y, and Z, I'm going to kill you, right? You could call it a mukrah as well, right? Somebody is being forced to do a prohibited act. So one person A, he puts a gun to, right? There's going to be he'll be responsible in some way, but in reality, who is the most of the blame going to be on? It's going to be on the indirect cause. He didn't do the killing, but he had such a strong influence on the situation, it was as if the one who caused the harm didn't exist. Another example is a person is riding an animal. And these are all examples that the fuqaha give. That's why I'm trying to show how it's relevant today. Okay? A person, what he does is a person is riding an animal. Somebody comes and pokes the animal. And then the animal goes crazy and kicks somebody and kills that person. Who's going to be liable now? The rider? No. The person who poked the animal. Okay? So another way of looking at this is that the indirect original cause, his effect on the end result is so strong that it negates the action of the immediate causer. The harm may not happen directly from the indirect causer, right? From that secondary source. However, the only thing that the one who caused harm, the mubashir, did, the only thing is he just connected the two. He connected the harm that the mutasabbib wanted to do to the object of his harm. Here's a little table that you could look at. So you look, if there's an immediate cause only, there's no secondary cause, there's no indirect original causer, regardless of whether the action is prohibited or not, liability is going to be on this cause, okay? And if there's both, you're going to look at who is doing a prohibited act. Okay, if only one of them is doing an act that's prohibited, that one is going to be to blame. And if both of them are doing a prohibited act, the immediate cause is going to be the one at fault. Okay, now we're going to frame AI. So Dr. Ansari, you could explain what is AI at this moment? I know we've talked about it a lot in the conference, but maybe you want to just rephrase it for people.
So I don't really want to get into the philosophical side of free will and whether AI has it or will ever have it. So to answer the question of what is AI, today we think of them as systems that are trained for very specific objectives. And so we had one of the speakers yesterday, I believe it was Sheikh Tahsin. He differentiated between strong AI and weak AI. And so all the applications and systems that we have today are weak AI. They're trained for very, very specific objectives. They're optimizing, what they're doing is essentially just optimizing a specific mathematical function with a very limited scope of applicability. And so they're accomplishing a very specific goal, usually just one goal, that the system designer or user has assigned them to do. They're not independently deciding what goal or what objective to pursue. They're doing something that they've been trained to do. Does that help you frame what an AI system is and how to analogize?
It does, and because we had been talking before, I spoke with many muftis and I got their inputs on it as well. And as has been said throughout the conference, this is all, nothing here is a fatwa, right? We're discussing this, it's a new field. So there's different ways that even different muftis have looked at this. So for example, some have looked at it like a tool, as you described right now. Essentially, it's a system that is programmed to fulfill certain functions. In this case, it's like a tool. You use a tool to do a certain predictable job. In the course of using a tool, sometimes something may happen that you don't predict, but it's still a tool. Others have said that it's a system that's programmed to fulfill certain functions, but there's a possibility of it acting unpredictably. In this case, this is a typo. In this case, it's more like a trained animal, right? A trained animal, kalbul mu'allam. You train it to do something, right? For example, you train a dog to hunt. And there's certain thresholds that it must meet in terms of accuracy, in terms of fulfilling its function, then you could set it out into the wild, right? And you're going to expect that it hunts for you, but at times, it might end up killing something else. It might end up eating from the animal that it killed, right? So the fuqaha, they have discussed many rulings about what to do when an animal acts unpredictably and causes harm.
So, if you want to ask the question, wouldn't an AI be more predictable, more precise than a trained animal? And then this gets back to what practices have you followed? So again, we're moving from something very ancient, or an ancient concept, which is a trained animal, and we're trying to analogize a predictive AI system to it. And so this would go back to what practices have you followed to make sure that your system is beyond X% precise. So do you need it to be 90% precise? Do you need it to be 99% precise? 99.9, 99.99%? Have you followed the best practices in your field to perform the testing? When you did the experiment, did you follow the current best known statistical methodologies? So it goes back to what precautions have you taken? How much, if you analogize it again to a trained animal, how much time have you invested in training that animal, and how certain are you in their capabilities? And so this is what, would this be what removes liability, Mufti Wahaaj?
So, it could be more like a tool again, but if we were to look at it from the trained animal perspective, even though AI might be much more accurate than a trained animal, the process remains the same, right? That you are training something, you're working with something, and the Sharia, or best practices in this case, have defined a threshold at which you could say that this thing is reliable enough to go out into the world, right? And when it goes out into the world, right, it's okay. A person is okay at that point. You won't be sinful. It can be used for its own, for its objective, design objective. But even then, there's a possibility that things will go wrong. And when it goes wrong, again, where does liability fall? Or sometimes, there's one other thing to remember. Sometimes nobody is liable, right? Sometimes a person may die and it's very unfortunate, but nobody's responsible for it, right? So that's also something to keep in mind. Okay, what if AI becomes sentient? That was the whole topic yesterday.
So again, for some definition of sentience, right? There's no agreed upon definition. And so really this is uncharted territory, and this is a hypothetical that most experts are today very skeptical of ever achieving. So do with that as you will, Mufti Wahaaj.
So if AI becomes sentient, wallahu alam, maybe at that point it could be analogous to a slave. Some acts of a slave are attributed to the slave itself, others are attributed to the owner. But as you said, that's really theoretical at this point. Okay, so now we're going to come back to our examples. I want you to think of these and think of those three principles. Number one, when the mubashir is the sole cause of harm, when there's no mutasabbib, no secondary cause in the picture, the mubashir is going to be responsible, liable, regardless of whether the action is prohibited. Number two, the mutasabbib is only going to be liable when they do a prohibited act. And number three, when there is both an original cause and a direct cause, you'll basically look at whose action has more influence, who is stronger. So now think about these things, and now we're going to quiz you. Okay, let's go with the alarm clock. Okay, a person, I can give you the answer. A person, they miss Fajr in the morning, right? A person, they set their alarm clock, and based on wherever they are in the sleep cycle, it doesn't go off in time. They end up missing Fajr, right? Who's liable here? Who's to blame here? Who's sinful here, maybe? Go ahead, just call it out. You are. Why? Yeah, you relied on it. There's nobody else here, right? There's no mutasabbib here. You can't blame it. You're the only person here. Okay? The potential sin. Potential, I mean like if a person went to sleep on time and everything, inshallah, they'll be forgiven for it. But, if you stayed up really late and all of that, you'll be sinful maybe. Potential liability, what do I mean by potential liability? Let's say a person, they made an oath, like, Wallahi, I'm going to pray Fajr in the masjid. And then they don't wake up because their alarm, they didn't feel it, they didn't hear it, and went off at the wrong time. They'll have to make up for that oath. They'll have to do kafara. This is principle number one. Okay, now we come to the second thing. The autonomy, like car crash, application rejection, hate speech. Okay, these are all examples of potentially autonomous systems. Situations in which there's human oversight, they're pretty straightforward. The thing is like a tool at that point, right? The thing is like a tool. The more complicated thing that we'll have to ask about is what happens when the system is completely autonomous. When it's just a tool, the default is that the driver is going to be responsible, or the one using the system is going to be responsible. Like right now, we have these cars, right? I guess a lot of people are driving Tesla these days, or a lot of these cars, they have the self-driving mechanism, but there's still the steering wheel in the car. There's still a expectation that the driver is cognizant of what's going on and takes over if there's a need to, right? So it's a tool at that point. The driver would be responsible. But what happens if the system is completely autonomous? What happens if the car comes out, the car has no steering wheel in it? The person is not even sitting in the front seat. the person is sitting in the back seat, right? Now, what happens? How do we go through this? In these cases, you're going to have a immediate causer of harm, meaning somebody who's using the system. You're going to have a mutasabbib, you're going to have a mubashir, you're going to have harm, right? You may have many different layers and many different causes for this. So, Dr. Ansari, if you could explain what are all the layers in implementing an AI from beginning to end on a very high level for an autonomous system.
So modern systems, even the ones that don't include AI, are very, very complex, right? You require teams of developers and teams of project managers and program managers. And when you introduce AI into the equation, there's a lot happening, right? So there's people that are completely theoretical, and they're the ones developing the neural network architectures and the optimization algorithms that will then power thousands and millions of applications. So there's the algorithm developers. And then there's the application developers who take the algorithms that scientists come up with, and then they build concrete systems around them. And so you have, again, teams of engineers, teams of managers, and then at some level, if the application is complex enough, you have interaction with government regulators as well, right? And that blurs the line even more. And then you have potentially somebody who is administering the system. So you have the system that's developed, and then you have somebody that administers the system for a user, adding another layer of complexity. And so you have to really think very deeply about when something goes wrong, what level of the chain does the responsibility go up to? Was somebody negligent in approving it for use before it was ready? Is the vice president of the company who signed off on it without knowing the technical details, are they liable for it? Was it a bug in the algorithm from the very beginning that nobody caught? So it gets very complex very quickly.
So then, from a broad level, and again, as I said, there's a lot of room for discussion for the ulama on this, in assigning who is a mutasabbib, who's a mubashir, who's a direct cause, who's a secondary cause. But from a high level, we could say that a person who makes the algorithm, they're the most furthest removed from the harm, right? They've written an algorithm, right? And then they give it to a company, they decide, is it accurate to say that they decide how to implement it, how to adjust it. So all they've done is they've provided a raw material, like a raw material, to somebody to use how they want to use it. Okay? Then we have system developers. They're decision makers. They're the people who decided to remove human oversight from the process. You have system designers. And then you have a system user. Who would the system user be? For example, if a person is in a fully autonomous system, a decision maker who decided to remove the human being from the process and replace with a fully autonomous system, right? Would that person also be a mutasabbib because somebody's going to use the thing afterwards? For example, a car, somebody decided in whatever company it is that our cars are no longer going to have steering wheels, right? They're going to be fully autonomous cars. Now you've purchased the car, and now you sit inside of the car. Are you a mubashir? Are you an innocent bystander? These are a few things to think about. Okay? So now the default would be, and some things that the fuqaha have written that perhaps can help with this, understand this, is that a person is, even if you're using something, right? You're using something. Even if somebody instructs you to do something, you have some level of accountability. You have to do your due diligence. So the fuqaha, they write a masala, that if there is a man who hires somebody else, and this will be very relevant to maybe employees, a person hires somebody else to dig a well in the middle of a street, or dig a hole, dig a ditch in the middle of the street, and it's a public road, right? And the person who's hired, they know that this is a main road. This is a main road. And they go ahead and they still dig that hole. And then somebody goes and falls in that hole and dies. Who's going to be liable for that person's blood? It's not going to be the one who hired them, right? It's going to be the person who did the job. Why? Because their common sense would tell them that this is going to cause harm, right? They didn't stand up, they didn't say no, they didn't push back, they didn't take precaution, they just went ahead and did the job. You can't pawn that responsibility off to somebody else. Okay? So now the default is that a system user is going to be at fault unless manufacturer error is discovered. So the person who's using the system. Now there's differing opinions about this as well. For example, like I spoke to one of my colleagues, my very good friend, and he said, without a doubt, he said that anytime if you buy a car, self-driving car, and you sit in this car and you press go, Google Maps, go to this destination, and that car, it misreads somebody on the road, it doesn't detect it, it kills the person. He says the owner of the car is going to be liable. Why? He said it's like an arrow or it's like a gun. When a person shoots an arrow, they have the intent to hit its target. But when they shoot that arrow, they know full well that other factors may occur. It might be windy, the line of vision may not be straight, whatever it is, something may go wrong. And when somebody shoots an arrow and they hit a target unintentionally and they cause harm, that person is liable. Even if they didn't intend to do harm, they'll be liable at the end of the day, right? Others say that no, it's like one who's hired to build a wall or dig a ditch, right? In that case, when a person's hired to build a wall that's facing the street, one thing is you dig a ditch on your own property, right? You don't have to do any due diligence when it's on your own property because you don't intend for it to interface with anybody else. But when you dig a ditch in the middle of the road, when you build a wall that's facing out onto the street, your intention is that this thing that I'm building that may be for my use, it also is going to interact with the outside world. So now in that case, the person who's actually doing the thing, the mubashir, if they practice due diligence, sometimes they're not liable. So in cases of negligence, if only the user is negligent, right, the blame is going to be on them. If only the designer is negligent, the mutasabbib, they're negligent, but the user, they did everything that they were supposed to do, the designer would be liable. And sometimes both the designer and the user are negligent, and in that case, usually liability, it goes on to the user, although it's going to differ based on different situations. This goes to principle number 3. We look at whose influence on the situation had more effect on the outcome. Okay? So this is what we want to highlight again and again. And this comes to being an employee in a company, right? You can't just blame everything on your boss. At the end of the day, if you're causing harm and it's obvious to you that you're causing harm, you're going to be liable. You might not be liable in this country, right? You might not be sued as an individual, but you will be liable in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Many of these things that we're talking about, for example, liability. Whatever the law comes out to be in this country about self-driving cars, most likely the manufacturers will have different clauses saying that no liability will be on them, right? But at the end of the day, when we use these systems, even if we're not liable in a court of law, we may be liable in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if we're not liable in the court of law. In terms of court of law in Islamic countries, it's something to explore who's going to be liable for damages as well. Okay, the next thing is ChatGPT, plagiarism. Mufti Nabil Sahib, he talked about this, mashallah, yesterday. So, if somebody uses ChatGPT to write their paper for them, is it right? Is it wrong? You tell me. It's wrong, right? But one thing is, let's say, not plagiarism, let's say that a person, they use ChatGPT on a paper. Is that alone wrong? No harm might be caused. It might be in line with urf and policies that the institution has put in place. So what we wanted to do with this one is we wanted to highlight the importance of Muslims shaping best practices. Because Dr. Ansari, is there a consensus on what are best practices in AI fields right now? And if there isn't, how can Muslims work on shaping this? How can Muslims have a prominent role in this?
So this is a very rapidly developing field. The iron is red hot right now. There's multiple working groups trying to nail this down, right? How do you assign responsibility? How do you assign liability? Where does the line lie? The federal government is working on guidelines. I believe there's a report due in August about the level of regulation and things like that. And so I think the time is right now for us to introduce our voice in these conversations. We have principles, as Mufti Wahaaj has very beautifully drawn out from our tradition. We have principles that are valuable contributions to this discussion. And so it is vitally important for us to add our voices to this national conversation, international conversations that are happening around this right now, because, again, they are good for humanity as a whole, our insights into Daman, liability.
You know, I'll just add this as a side point. One of my asatiz, our Shaykh al-Hadith, Qari Muhammad Ilyas, Hafizahullah Ta'ala, he used to always tell us that a person, they will benefit without a doubt in this world and in the hereafter if a person follows the Sharia. So much so that even if a non-Muslim follows the Sharia unintentionally, they will get unexpected barakah in their lives. They'll get outcomes in their life that they don't expect from following the Sunnah. So when we voice our concerns and put in Islamically ethical practices and make these the norms, people will see, non-Muslims will see, that it's beneficial for their dunya, and they'll be willing to adopt these as well, inshallah ta'ala. The last thing we wanted to talk about is from our case studies, defense contractors, weapon system manufacturers. This speaks about individual accountability. There's a whole, set of masail that fall under the heading of i'ana ala al-ma'siyah, in assisting in sin. And Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi has the most vast, nuanced, and accommodating view of this out of all of the other fuqaha.
So let me set up the question.
Yeah.
So to be put more concretely, one of the questions that I posed to Mufti Wahaaj in the course of preparing this is, again, the theoretical question is as he laid out, but more concretely for people like myself and for many members of the audience, what does this mean for us and our employers? So many of us work in the tech industry. Some of us may work in other industries that feed into defense contractors and weapon system manufacturers and other industries that have the potential to cause harm. Maybe the primary purpose is not causing harm. In some cases it might be, if you're literally making weapons, right? And so I would love to get a better understanding of how do we understand our role in this, and what level of accountability do we have?
So, as I was mentioning, Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi, he has the most nuanced and vast approach to this i'ana ala al-ma'siyah. And for many masail that the other fuqaha say that a person's income, for example, would be haram, Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi says that because there is a willing actor between the secondary cause, that person's income would be halal. So for example, this masala of Uber Eats, it comes up a lot. If you're driving Uber Eats and you are delivering food that's haram, right? Is your income halal or not? So according to Imam Saab's position, Imam Abu Hanifa's position, it would be halal. But despite that, there's a select group of masail in which even Imam Abu Hanifa's position says that a person their income will be haram, or it will be makruh. Their income, it will be prohibited. Why? Because they're engaged in i'ana ala al-ma'siyah. And this has to do with assisting those who are at war with Muslims, right? Assisting those who are rebelling against Muslims, those who are at war with Muslims, those who are causing harms. So this is one of the few cases where people who are further removed from the process, right? Further removed from we said usually the algorithm designer is out of the picture, right? But when they are working actively with the defense contractor, or when they know that their work is going to be utilized by defense contractors to make weapons that are going to cause, kill Muslims, which it's not theoretical, it's actually happening, then a person will be liable depending on how close they are to it, right? So every person has to think long and hard, because Muslims, a lot of Muslims are employed in in the tech industry. At the end of the day, risk is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will, you're so qualified, Allah will write your risk somewhere else, right? But if a person stays in these fields just for this dunya, it could be that they also have the blood on their hands. They have some accountability, not the full accountability, but they play a part, and they will have to answer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how did you contribute to the killing? You're making dua for Muslim brothers here and there, but at the same time, you are in this chain that's leading to these Muslim brothers and sisters passing away. So again, this is something, you have local muftis that you should speak to, whenever, al-halalu bayyin wal-haramu bayyin wa baynahuma umurun mushtabihat la ya'lamuhunna kathirun minan nas. If you're worried, I'm working for a defense contractor, or I am working for somebody, for a company who's working with these defense contractors, weapons manufacturers, etc. Let me go and let me ask a mufti about what is my role in this. Okay, so this is for questions. And while we're getting the questions, I just would like to acknowledge a few people. Number one, we'd like to thank Darus Salam for giving us the platform and pushing us to try to put something together. Number two, I bothered and pestered a lot of muftis for this, but particularly two. One is Mufti Faisal Mahmoodi. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward him abundantly. And my good friend Mufti Qasim Abdullah. Talk to him every day about many, many different things. So may Allah reward him. And lastly, our brother Junaid Malik, to thank him as well. They say about Chicago people, except for Mufti Azim, Chicago people, they don't like to leave Chicago. Like my relatives, I think if they leave the north side of Chicago, they think they're like Musafir or something, right? I'm like that for Michigan. I never want to leave. And even in Michigan, people call me for bayans and stuff. I just stay in my masjid, in my area. So it's Junaid's karamat that he got me out here. And every step of the process, Junaid Bhai, he made very, very easy. He was very, very helpful. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward him. And I wouldn't be exaggerating if I say he was one of the main impetus and one of the main drivers of this entire weekend. There's many, many others who helped. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward him for all of his hard work.
Jazakullahu Khairun. Inshallah, right now we will take Q&A specifically for Mufti Wahaaj and Dr. Ansari, inshallah. Afterwards, there will be another panel with 3 muftis and 2 AI experts, inshallah, for further questions. So you can keep the questions related to the topic at hand right now, and then the more general questions, inshallah, for the next session. Jazakallah.
How can we convince Muslims who work for defense contractors like Raytheon and have built long careers in those companies to leave their jobs? I mean, that's up to you to how you convince them. But just remind them that one day a person will have to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and answer questions. The role of our taxes used in killing Muslims, I would think that it's very far off. Again, a person can take a moral stand, however they want to take a moral stand. And I'm not saying to evade taxes or anything. But I've heard people, they say that, for example, like, well, I'm going to leave from this country. I'm going to move to another country. That's my long-term goal, because I don't want my tax dollars to be used to kill Muslims. And that's a noble stance that a person can have. But in terms of your tax dollars being used for that, you're very, very, very far removed from the situation. Your tax dollars are used for a lot of different things. To what extent is paying taxes to a government, i'ana ala al-ma'siyah, pretty much the same thing? Will AI get weaker over time due to more data that's AI driven rather than human driven? That's a question for you.
Where do I go?
Will AI get...
I'm not sure I understand the question. Will it get weaker over time due to more? Oh, I see what you're saying. This is a really interesting question. I'm actually dealing with it at work right now. So the question is, if the training data for AI is itself generated by machines, will it impact the quality of the decisions that come out of it? And the question is not whether it becomes weaker, but whether whether the system itself is biased in some way, and whether the training data now reinforces those same biases, whereas before you had an off-ramp to correct those biases. And so yes, you do run the risk, unless you have robust auditing systems to correct for the reinforcement of those errors, you do run the risk of kind of reinforcing the trajectory of your AI system. And this is not an algorithmic question. This is not an AI question, but this is more a system development question. How do you design your system so that it's robust to this happening?
Okay, important. I made a Forex trading bot with AI and algorithms in its back. It earns significant profit. What's the Islamic perspective for such things? Mufti Abar Mirza Hafizahullah is an Islamic finance expert. You can speak with him, inshallah. As a woman working in the tech field, it feels like a good opportunity since it is mostly remote work. Are there any fields in tech that is sure not to help or hurt Muslims?
Again, I would refer back to Dr. Waleed's presentation a little bit earlier, where he, mashallah, he broke down the different categories in which your work can be, for example, almost purely for the sake of Allah, for the sake of advancement of the ummah or the deen, and then he kind of broke it down at different levels. So I would refer back to the previous panel for that.
They want to know how to reach out to you.
If you're unable to come in person, just search for me on LinkedIn. Search for Hidayath, and then my last name, Ansari, Ansari. Please reach out to me and message me. I will respond, inshallah.
Dua for a good job. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all halal rizq filled with barakah.
Ameen.
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 That's it.
Okay. Oh,
And they're all there. We have 2 minutes.
oh. You don't want to cook. There's more.
There's more? Subhanallah wa bihamdik, subhanakallah wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.
Jazakullahu Khairun wa ahsan al-jaza for the extremely pertinent, amazing lecture and presentation. Inshallah, we're going to, we would like to call up the following respected speakers, AI experts, and also muftis. If Mufti Abrar, as well as Mufti Nabil, if he has arrived, Hafizakumullah, if you can both kindly make your way to the front, as well as Dr. Ma'moon and Dr. Fahad. Inshallah, we will start the broader Q&A session, and it will be also, inshallah, moderated by our very own Junaid, inshallah.
Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man walahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin. Amma ba'd. Alhamdulillah, we know that many of you, many different questions. So alhamdulillah, this final panel will start with one round of questions for the panelists, and then we'll move to audience questions, inshallah. Mufti Nabil was unfortunately not able to be here. Please make dua for him and his family, inshallah. So we'll start with the first question. Maybe we can begin with Dr. Waleed, maybe we can start on your side. So for most Muslims, AI seems to be something happening in the background, maybe not at this retreat, but in general. Is it like Bitcoin, something that many of us hear about, but it's not actually going to affect us?
I think I would have given a different answer 2 years ago. I think the generative AI revolution is so significant that it's going to touch everyone in his life. And so we can no longer ignore it. The way that, generally, like I presented on the first day, there's AI creeping into all of our lives, into every transaction, into every app that you use. But this is new because it will cause a lot of social change. And so I think this is not one that we can afford to ignore. I think you could have ignored AI until about 2 years ago, but now we need to pay attention.
Mufti Abrar, many times it seems like Muslims are playing catch up. The world is changing around us, and we seem to be on the back burner, just waiting for the world to change. What is needed for scholars in the Muslim community to be able to address emerging technologies proactively?
I guess before I answer that one, I want to ask Mufti Wahaaj a question. Mufti Wahaaj, can you tell us at your masjid, what's the scope of your responsibilities?
So one thing, alhamdulillah, we have 2 imams, so we split the salahs. So I have certain days where I lead 5 salahs. Other days I lead like maybe 1, 2, depending. I have to teach Hifz class and do the administration for Hifz as well. I have to do office hours, answer questions that come by email, counseling, weekly tafsir, dars hadith, and the khutbah, and other things as they come up. Counseling.
And that wasn't sketched, by the way. That was asking Mufti Wahaaj on the spot. The point is that you have, we talk about, I guess, the problem that we spoke about, that I spoke about in my talk, about the number of questions that come, the number of people who are available to answer. Okay? And then there's an aspect of not just a lot of questions, but then there's also keeping up with all the things that are happening and all the developments. And they're not, Dr. Waleed and others did a good job explaining what they are, but they're not necessarily simple concepts, right? They take time to invest, to understand them, to see and think through what all their implications are ahead of even being asked about them in the first place. The issue is, we as a community, right, have to think about, do we in our community first have the people who can deal with these matters, right? The question may be, and I guess some aspect of bias in the question about how do we stop being reactive and be more proactive. Let me kind of take a step back and say, well, first in our community, how do we ensure we've got the right people to address these matters? Okay, do we have them in our community? And if we have them in our community, do we have sufficient number of them in our community? Because it is a fard kifaya. We have to understand, as on a community, it is a fard kifaya, meaning it's fard on the entire community. As long as some people fulfill the obligation, everyone's taken care of. But if no one in the community does it, then everyone is at fault. So it's a fard kifaya within the community to ensure that you have ulama who can deal with such matters, and that you have ulama who are dedicated for tafaqquh in deen and so on. But that fard isn't fulfilled if you don't have the people. And that fard isn't fulfilled if you have the people in terms of they have the skills, but they don't have the capability to engage with those skills sufficiently. So, alhamdulillah, in his area, let's say you have Mufti Wahaaj. Use live examples. I mean, you sat in the center seat, so using you as an example here. You have Mufti Wahaaj, alhamdulillah, like you have somebody, let's say, who studies qualified. Okay? And you have really good talent there who can answer these questions. I mean, alhamdulillah, you saw his presentation. You have somebody who's capable of dealing with these matters, dealing with these questions, looking at what is not just being asked about today, but what is coming up on the horizon. But at the same time, if he's also the person who has to lead salah and do the khutbahs and do the counseling and do the youth activities and do the masjid administration work and this and this, I mean, as a community, if we are not enabling the people to have the sufficient time and abilities to do the work that they're supposed to be doing, not to devalue any of the other work, obviously, but that you say, well, we need a subset of people who are just dedicated to this work. And if we haven't like provided those people, if we haven't enabled those people to study and come back, and we haven't then given them the platform to do that work, then I mean, I think that it's unfair to kind of say, well, how come the scholars aren't keeping up? Even if we, let's say, assume that was true, you say, well, that question isn't a fair question at that point. The question is, as a community, because the issues affect all of us, they're not issues that affect the scholars, they're questions that affect the community. As a community, what are we doing? Okay? And if we have provided, like if we have invested in the people to study and to come back, and we have invested in them to give them the facilities and the platforms to be able to do their work, and then they're falling behind, then you can ask the question, hey, how come we are catching up? But in the absence of that, I think that the question itself is unfair.
Mufti Wahaaj, maybe along similar lines, I think like, especially for the scholars who presented at this conference, mashallah, many of them are working full-time, teaching, imamat, or as Mufti Nabil and Mufti Abrar work full-time separately. Is it really reasonable for people to expect their imams to have answers to these kinds of questions? I think Mufti Abrar touched on people who are dedicated fully to researching emerging technologies. But what about the local imam? How can communities ensure that the imam is equipped to answer these questions?
So, I think Mufti Abrar, Hafizahullah, he explained it perfectly, that if the imam has so many responsibilities, and that's the way that you want to utilize them, that's okay, but you have to realize that there's different levels of ulama, and they have different functions, just like there's different types of engineers, there's different types of physicians. They all have their, specialties. And the fact that, a pulmonologist cannot really answer you questions regarding cancer doesn't mean that he's any less of a qualified doctor. It means that his area of focus is something else. So we need to, number one, stop the competition between ulama and masajid. This happens a lot. My masjid is better, our imam is better, our imam is better, this person, that. No. We need to look as we're all on the same team, right? And then realize that there's a tiered approach. So your local alim, a lot of times, your local imam is going to be like a generalist. He could help you with, he's like your, the practitioner, the GP, right? General practitioner. He'll help you, he'll lead your salahs, he'll teach your kids, he'll teach the adults a little bit, he'll be able to answer basic level questions for you. But if he doesn't know anything, and he has the humility to say, I don't know, which inshallah, if he was in the company of his elders for long enough, he'll know that there's no harm, and rather there's honor and izzah in saying, I don't know. There's power in saying, I don't know. The people shouldn't think, his musalli shouldn't think anything less of him. But it is fard kifaya to have somebody in that locality that the people can go to. So the imam should be able to say, well, go to so-and-so alim. Like we have Mufti Abu Ubaidah, Mufti Qasim in Detroit. Go to them. Like finance questions, whenever they come, I just say, well, I have my colleague. I'm going to see if I could give you his contact or number. Just contact him, inshallah. Mufti Qasim. Or whoever it is. So you have the alimul hayy. Then you have the alimul Madina, the alim of the city, who even the local imams, they may go to for help. And then you have higher level than that. And many times that's a council, like we have the American Fiqh Academy, headed by Hazrat Mufti Abrar. And we have other organizations like that, where even maybe somebody who is known as one of the more senior ulama in their city, they say, this is out of my, my range, I'll go to them. And the public should not think anything less of anybody on this chain. The one who is like, the main alim of the country, alimul dawla, or the main, he might not be doing imamat, right? So he's fulfilling one role, the imam is fulfilling another role. So I think people need to also appreciate that there's specializations, that everybody has a very vital role, and you won't be able to function without any of the people in the process.
Dr. Ansari, maybe switching gears a little bit to those in tech. Non-Muslims, the CEOs of major AI companies have PhDs in the field. They've worked in the field for a while. Some of them may be founders, but they're not necessarily religious, or they don't necessarily consult scholars. Given that and how fast the field is developing, it seems like a big disadvantage for Muslims. That instead of just developing the technology you want to develop, now you have to go and ask a scholar. So I know you worked with Mufti Wahaaj on this presentation. Has that changed the way you view it? Is it a disadvantage for Muslims? Do you think it just slows down the process unnecessarily?
It's an interesting question. I may pass this off to Dr. Waleed. He has far more experience than I do. So, yeah.
Wow. Well, this is a very heavy question. So I can answer on the... I really don't feel worthy to be on the stage with scholars who know way, way, way more than me about this topic. This is the best answer to my ability. I think the first thing to note is that Muslims are at the top. Like, alhamdulillah, I happen to live in Silicon Valley. The number of Muslims at the top of these companies, at NVIDIA or OpenAI, it's a large number. I think the way I think about it is that there's a layer of wisdom, or a layer of a different perspective and a deeper perspective that may prevent Muslims and their companies that they advise from going too far. And so I think that capability is very important. I don't feel like the fatwas or the religious opinions would slow us down. It's almost like they're making sure that we don't go down the wrong track. There's a question of timeliness, because the fatwa process is it takes time, and is there how quickly can we react because of fatwa? But that's something that I think Brother Abrar, Mufti Abrar covered, right? In the sense of that's not just a problem that we can point the imams to. It's really a problem that we point to our community to, as in, has it made enough time from the scholars available to answer these questions? And have they fulfilled their fard kifaya on the topic?
Let's add one thing, sorry. Jazakallahu Khairun, Dr. Waleed. I would just add that the intent with the pairing of a scholar and somebody in the field was that we're able to leverage each other's expertise. And so the way that I like to put it is that Mufti Wahaaj, mashallah, he is a technically minded Mufti, right? His education, his interest, and so forth. And I would characterize myself as somebody who is literate, right? I'm not as well studied, nowhere near as well studied as Mufti Abrar, Mufti Wahaaj. But I would say that I'm literate in some of the most basic Islamic sciences. And so we're able to work together because we can speak each other's languages. And so in terms of working in the industry, we need to all cultivate a level of literacy so that we at least have our instincts right. When we see a company's product vision roadmap, we need to be at least Islamically literate enough that we know something is off or something is right. Right? We have to build up that level of knowledge for ourselves, for those working in the industry, and then have confidence in ourselves that we are connected with the text and with the scholars enough that we're able to have that in the moment at least. And then we take our time and we go back to our muftis, obviously, because this has to be properly fleshed out and explained. Yeah. So.
I just want to add one thing. In South Africa, one of the jamiyats there, one of the councils of ulama, what they do is, they train students, they train future muftis, and then once they finish, then they actually sponsor those graduates to say, okay, you now go into law, you now go into medicine, you now go into these other areas, and they actually sponsor their education within these fields. And now then you have these ulama who are highly educated, and now they're actually in the different sciences as well. So now when the ulama need research, and to Dr. Ansari's point about making sure like we're able to connect and speak at a certain language, that now alhamdulillah, like you have ulama who have gone into these different fields, so now you can have a conversation with them, your research becomes easier, they're in the field, and they can also now from an ilmi perspective think about what's happening, what are the implications, what's coming up, what's on the horizon, and then they're still connected back to the ulama who are, their focus is more on kind of full-time involvement in the field. Like it's a very good model that works, right? But there's sponsorship, there's kind of financial practicalities that work there, and I don't think we have that. Not that we cannot, right? We certainly can, but inshallah, as a community, if we value the effort and we see the value in that, and if we sponsor it, like there's a lot of good that can come from that as well.
SubhanAllah, it seems like all of you are mentioning like a lack of investment. If we're actually serious about the Muslim community taking such an active role, then there needs to be some kind of investment behind it. Inshallah, now we'll switch to audience questions. Maybe we can just go through some of these. Doctor, I can just list some of the questions and maybe the panelists can answer them as it comes to them. Dr. Walid, it's a more technical question. So when someone asks a question to a chatbot, is it saved? Will anyone view it? At airports now they have like option to get your photo taken. Is that used to train the model? Is it immediately deleted? Maybe we can start there.
Yeah. So it really depends on the terms of service of the particular user. If you look at OpenAI's terms of service, my understanding is now that they guarantee that your particular conversation, if you pay the subscription fee, will not be used to train their AI. But you should check that yourself to make sure that it's correct. With respect to face recognition, I don't know the detailed answers. But face recognition, you can do something interesting, which is there are so many faces that have already been seen that adding more faces doesn't really make a difference. It's just incrementally, you can do the comparisons without having to store the face other than for recognizing that person's particular face. The technique is called embedding. And so that by the time the embedding is done, you don't really need to store very much at all. So I wouldn't be overly concerned about that. But again, it's really, we have to dig into these things. I'm just giving an educated guess, and probably I shouldn't have even done that. But that's my understanding.
Jazakullahu Khair. I was worried you may pass it to Dr. Ansari. Mufti Abrar, one thing people are wondering is, sorry, if the audience can just move up, I think there are some people who may still come in later, so please, if you can move up a little bit so that there is space. Mufti Abrar, one question that many are wondering is, generative AI seems like such a great technology, and I think we did discuss both harms and benefits. The question is, when people are trying to apply this to Islam, are there guidelines they should follow? What would you recommend to somebody who's like, I'm really motivated by everything I've heard, and I want to use these skills for Islam?
Yeah. I mean, we talked yesterday about like the technologies has a lot of potential, there's a lot of value. Just within this program itself, I spoke to multiple brothers who are working on different products, mashallah, around this, whether it's using it to correct and improve one's recitation of the Quran. Imagine in a madrasa, like if you, or in a Hifz class, you have now the students who have an app with them, an AI based, that can actually pick up on your recitation errors, can correct the tajweed errors, right? Like there's people who are working on that. There's people who are working on being able to, and I don't think this is like the projects weren't confidential in that sense. The people who are working on, Islamicizing, if you will, explanations of like science that may happen within schools. So then now you have teachers, alhamdulillah, like who can use certain apps to now actually explain within their class things from an Islamic perspective. Like there's a lot of good work that is already happening, and there's a lot of potential ahead as well. I think we just have to be mindful of how we utilize the resources, and that we don't, like Dr. Lee is talking about the terms of service, right? Things are produced for a certain purpose, like they're meant to be used for those purposes. And if there is something that is produced and it's meant to be a companion, it's meant to be a help, it's meant for it to be like a first round assistance for certain matters. Like now if you take that to be truth and take that to be haqq, then I mean, in a way, then you haven't used it in a manner that was meant to be used. So I think we just have to be mindful of what we're using, and is that product meant to be used as such, and Islamically does it make sense to use it in that manner. I think in terms of like a proper drafted, published guidelines around certain things, that is not available. That was an interesting conversation that some of us were having in the morning, that is something that the ulama and some of the AI experts can collaborate on to produce such a set of guidelines, inshallah.
I just, one thing that I've been processing as I've been listening to Mufti Abrar and the others is I've been thinking a lot about why AI in particular, or generative AI, is so challenging. And I think the key to it is we have rarely, if ever, seen a technology that is developing this fast. So I was reflecting, for example, on Mufti Abrar's slide where, the second last slide where it says, does it require vast amounts of knowledge? And the answer was yes. And then all the others were crosses. But I was going to myself, actually, I saw something last week that makes that cross kind of, not a yes, but kind of a gray area. And so even before Mufti Abrar has kind of put the slides out, already the goalposts have shifted. And just the pace at which we're going to have to move is going to be a challenge for us as a Muslim community. And that is something unique that, again, we've been talking about the printing press. That was not a very fast social change, right? If we think about, the Industrial Revolution, that took decades and decades. Here we are, 2 years into the revolution, into another technology revolution. And that's why I think AI is so challenging to us, and why, we're working together to try to deal with it. Because it's a very, very different technology. It used to be that you have to do physical things, but once you start to talk about software, it's literally a piece of software released this week could change the equation for the whole industry. So software moves faster than hard things, and that's something that's very unique, because now you have kind of this loop of improvement that uses AI to build better AI, to improve the AI, to make a better AI. And that's actually starting to become more and more prevalent. So it's a very, very fascinating thing. You can go too far and the singularity, blah, 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 and super intelligence and all that kind of stuff. But there is some truth to the fact that NVIDIA, for example, uses AI to optimize the chip design that it uses to run AI to improve the next one. So this all leads to like a radically fast pace that we've rarely been challenged with, in terms of the Islamic challenges that come with it.
So the pace of change seems to be pretty rapid, and Mufti Wahaaj, I think a lot of concerns about AI are related to this as well. The idea that we're going to have a technology now that could cause lots of harm, not hypothetically, but it's doing it now. So one question that was asked is, will it reach a point where the harm it's doing is so much that the technology itself would be banned?
The technology itself will be banned by the...
So they put here, they say, like the example of alcohol.
So as far as it being banned, I guess it would be a government decision. If it's that, if they mean, will a person call it haram?
Yeah, sorry, I can read the question.
I don't think that it's a very a simple question, right? Because then you're going to have to look at each thing on a case-by-case basis. But it's a technology, right? So you have to look at what is it doing, and maybe the end result, maybe a specific, there's websites, right? There's some websites that are haram, right? So you're going to say that those are haram, but you can't say the internet or the underlying thing is haram. So you're going to have to look at everything on a case-by-case basis.
Dr. Ansari, one question is, Dr. Walid mentioned how fast the field is changing. Does it really make sense for people to invest in a PhD or a higher degree in AI, or is it better just to get practical experience in the field?
It depends at what level you want to be involved in the field. If you want to be involved at a science level, perhaps in a research scientist or applied scientist position, it absolutely does make sense to invest, because when you do a PhD, you're not learning the latest software that was developed last week, right? You are learning the underlying concepts of the field. You're learning, the algorithms. You're learning about what used to be the tough problems and what are the tough problems. You're learning about how the field is structured and not the superficial current software that is used to run it. If you're looking to sort of just be in the field and develop applications rapidly tomorrow, then it may not make sense for you to invest the time to invest in the deeper theoretical concepts. Although I would argue that is never a waste of time. It's just a question of prioritizing your time.
Dr. Walid, there's this question of sentience that keeps coming up. Does AI actually understand right now? So the chatbot we're using, if it talks like a human being, it gives evidence like a human being, is that proof enough of understanding what's actually happening there?
Yeah. I think you should refer to Brother Tahsin's talk from yesterday. It was really good. He talked, for me, the thing that resonated from that the most was the idea of the Chinese room, right? Imagine a room where there's a person who doesn't understand Chinese but has a massive rule book and then looks up stuff and then puts stuff back out. Would you ever call that system intelligent or sentient? No, you wouldn't. Ironically, the design of these current generative AI systems is very close to a gigantic rule book. The rule books consist of rules that says, pay attention to this word, pay attention to this word, and if you see this combination of words through the text, then probably this is the next word that you want to put out, and then repeat, and then repeat, and then repeat, and just keep doing this autoregressive, what's called the autoregressive system, over and over again. I can't see where the intelligence is. At best, you could call this a mirror of human intelligence. And so, to me, the stochastic parrot thing, that this is just like a parrot that is very useful, is really the part that resonates with me. And I haven't seen a cogent argument for why that is wrong.
Mufti Abrar, there's always this trend of techno-optimism, the idea that maybe technology is the cure for all the problems humans face, everything from poverty to disease. In Islamic law, there was a similar complaint actually against the scholars of Islam about evidence in courts, and the idea that now there's new kinds of evidence like video and DNA. Could you explain the objection and then what happened over time?
Yeah, I mean, the ulama get like their unfair share of beating quite a bit, right? So there was, I think what's being referenced is within the court, the legal system, you needed to have, you have to have witnesses, people who will come and say, I physically saw XYZ occur, and then you have witnesses who will testify to that case, and the judge rules based off of that. Then you had, CCTV, and then you have like video cameras and Ring doorbells and camera phones and all, like, you have all this video evidence, and then people said, well, what about, can we just bring the video evidence in replacement here? And in certain type of cases of like hudud, where there's an Islamic punishment, in accusations of like adultery and things of that nature, then what ulama mentioned was, look, video evidence could be some sort of a supporting argument for in certain matters, but it does not replace the need for witnesses in certain cases, right? Like, meaning that you cannot say, I don't have the witness, but I have this recording, and let the recording take place of the witness itself. Okay? And then the people, many people then said, well, this is like ulama being like backward, and like they don't like anything until like it becomes very common or something of that nature. And lo and behold, then you have like deep fakes and like further involvement of technology, and where you can't tell if that video really, or it becomes extremely difficult to say whether that video is, true or not true. And then like people say, oh, okay, I see what the ulama meant, right? So I don't know if it's like the ulama are not up to the times, or like they're like way ahead of times, and like people are just like still catching up to like what they're thinking about.
Mufti Wahaaj, maybe on a similar note, the question is like, I know Mufti Minhaj addressed this topic, our seminary is relevant. Looking back on your experience studying the Islamic sciences, was the curriculum relevant? I mean, these books are very old. You hinted at it in your presentation that maybe there is some relevance, but what do you think, how are the Islamic sciences relevant? Is it just fiqh? Like, what is it about your curriculum and your training that you think benefits you today when you're dealing with fatwa?
It's definitely everything in our curriculum is extremely relevant because it's created to, it's been designed rather, to teach a person how to approach anything that may come in front of them in a methodical manner. You learn logic, you learn how to apply concepts. Of course, we learn the nusus. And along with that, however, it's very important that we have examples in front of us. We have the company of our seniors who show us how to present these. You know, many times we'd be sitting in class, right? Like there's a masail about slaves and this and that. We think, how is it relevant? Or animals, zakat and animals, many different types of things, right? We think, how is it relevant? And then later on, you're able to make that connection. But why? It's because we were taught how to apply things here from point A to point B. And there's many times when I'm dealing with a situation that's really difficult, and it just takes you back to what our teacher said in class, and like subhanAllah, it applies. Because these sciences, along with the academics, there's the spirituality that's imparted as well. And Mufti Abrar, he touched on this a lot yesterday, that there is the need for the ilm, and then there is a need for the spirituality. And a lot of times the spirituality is the bridge that takes the ilm and allows you to apply it to the current day.